Marjorie Finn stood in the kitchen, her knees aching from a full day on her feet. She lifted the roast chicken from the oven, its golden skin crackling softly. The house smelled of cinnamon, rosemary, and the faint sting of bleach from the 3 rounds of scrubbing she'd done earlier. "Milo deserves a clean birthday kitchen," she whispered to herself. Calvin had once promised she wouldn't need to cook on Milo's birthdays anymore, but that promise faded years ago. Through the thin kitchen door, she heard voices and laughter, none of them directed toward her. She arranged the pudding cups on the counter, the vanilla ones Milo liked most. The napkins she had folded into fans drooped from the warm room, so she fluffed them again with patient fingers. Through the slightly open door, she saw the table covered with bright plates and a cheap birthday banner she reused every year. She waited for someone to check on her. No one did. She whispered, "I don't mind," though the truth pressed heavier than the tray she carried. Marjorie stirred the gravy slowly, letting the motion calm her stiff hands. Outside, soft flakes of snow drifted past the window. Inside, an old Christmas song floated gently from the speakers Calvin installed months ago during one of his rare helpful moods. Petra's voice cut through the music. "Marjorie, can you whip up that pudding?" Milo asked for it. Marjorie answered, "It's already done," but doubted Petra heard her. She peeked through the crack in the door. Milo sat wearing a plastic fireman's hat, his cheeks smeared with frosting. Calvin scrolled his phone instead of watching his son. There was no chair for her. Marjorie noticed it as she counted the plates again. Calvin, Petra, Milo, Aunt Liza, even the neighbor's child. Every seat was taken. She swallowed the sting and turned to pour hot cider into a pitcher. Just then, Milo rushed into the kitchen and grabbed candy from the bowl. "Not even a thank you?" she asked gently. "Dad says it's my day," he mumbled through marshmallows. She nodded and lifted the casserole pan. It slipped for a moment, clattering loudly onto the counter. No one came to check. Petra popped her head into the kitchen. "Could you add whipped cream to the pudding? Milo says it's not the same without it." "Sure," Marjorie said, masking her sigh. They were out of cream, so she would use the powdered mix again. At the sink, she ran her hands under lukewarm water, hoping to ease the throbbing in her joints. Her knuckles were red and cracked. She opened the cabinet for ointment and paused when she saw a thin envelope tucked behind the pipes. Old, yellowed, forgotten. She closed the cabinet quickly and returned to work. Later, as the party wound down, Calvin called from the living room. "Mom, take a photo of us." She wiped her hands and lifted her phone, capturing the smiling trio. Petra leaning close, Calvin half hugging her, Milo grinning. Marjorie didn't ask for a picture with them. She never did. That night, scrolling through her phone, she paused at the photo. Everyone was at the table, laughing. She felt a strange hollow ache, realizing she wasn't in a single image. "Of course not," she whispered. "I was taking them." Her shoulders burned from lifting trays all afternoon. The kitchen was quiet now, lit only by the dim bulb over the stove. Marjorie slipped off her apron and folded it neatly over a chair that wasn't hers. She pressed her hand against her ribs, where a dull ache deepened. She looked at the kettle, still warm from earlier. The cocoa she had been preparing for Milo had ended up spilled all over her chest, and no one asked if she was all right. Outside, the snow thickened, clinging to the window like frostbitten lace. Milo burst into the kitchen earlier that afternoon like a tiny storm, demanding cookies. "You've had 2 already, sweetheart," she told him gently. "Your tummy might hurt." But when he saw the cocoa she had prepared for him, foamy and topped with marshmallows, he grabbed it too hard. The mug slipped from his little hands. The scalding liquid splashed across her chest in a burning wave. Marjorie gasped, stumbling back as the mug shattered. She didn't scream. She couldn't. The pain clamped around her lungs, stealing her breath. Milo froze, then burst into loud, dramatic tears. Petra rushed in, dropping to her knees. "Oh my God, Milo! What happened?" She hugged him tightly. Not once did her eyes flick toward Marjorie. He looked mad," Milo sobbed, pointing at her. I was making cocoa for you, Marjorie whispered, holding a dish towel against the growing burn. You scared him, Petra snapped. You know how sensitive he is. I didn't raise my voice. He grabbed the mug. Petra didn't respond. Milo cried louder. The blame settled on Marjorie like fresh snow. Calvin's voice drifted from the living room. Mom, come on, he's 6. Don't make a big deal out of nothing. Nothing. The word cracked something inside her, not loudly, but silently, like a hairline fracture that only reveals itself later. Marjorie turned back to the sink, running a paper towel under cool water, pressing it softly to her chest beneath her shirt. The skin felt tight and raw. Her hands shook, but no one noticed. No one asked. Petra cooed over Milo, offering him a cookie. Calvin returned to his laptop. And Milo stopped crying the moment Petra softened. Hours later, after she cleaned the cocoa splatter from the floor and wiped down the counters, Marjorie finally retreated to her room. She peeled off her soaked shirt, wincing as the fabric tugged against her burned skin. A large red patch stretched from her collarbone to her ribs. She pressed a cold bag of peas against it, the sting sharp but necessary. The house hummed with distant sounds, TV commercials, Petra's laughter, Calvin's laptop clicks. No one knocked. No one asked. The loneliness felt heavier than the pain. Around 10:30, the house quieted. Marjorie walked into the kitchen and opened the cabinet under the sink. She pushed aside cleaning rags and trash bags until her fingers touched a familiar plastic folder. She pulled it out, wiping off a bit of dust. Inside lay the deed, her name printed boldly across the top. Marjorie Elise Finn, property owner. 4 years she had kept it hidden, just in case something happened to Calvin. She never imagined she'd reach for it because of something he'd done. She pressed the papers gently to her chest, just above the burn. At 2:14 a.m., Marjorie sat at the kitchen table with a glass of lukewarm milk and the deed beside her. The house was dark except for the faint glow above the stove. Outside, snow danced in slow spirals under an orange street lamp. She traced her finger along the edge of the document. She remembered signing it. Her father's inheritance paying for the modest home. Calvin and Petra had moved in for a year or two to save money. 14 years had slipped by, each one blurring the line between guest and ruler. She looked around the kitchen, her hand-painted teapot from Santa Fe, the backsplash she chose after months of collecting tile samples, the spice rack Calvin called overkill. Everything bore her fingerprints, yet no one in the house seemed to see her. She opened the back door and stepped onto the porch. The cold air stung her skin, but it felt honest. Across the street, a porch light flickered at Mr. Rowan's house. He stood there in his slippers, holding a watering can. Can't sleep either, he called quietly. Not tonight, Marjorie replied. Mr. Rowan chuckled softly. My arthritis loves this cold weather. But the violets don't seem to mind. You always take care of them, she said. And they never talk back, he joked. They stood in a comfortable silence only neighbors in their 60s could share. Finally he asked, You doing all right, Marjorie? She hesitated, then answered honestly. I'm thinking about going away for a few days. He nodded slowly, as if he had expected this moment. If you need anything, advice or a retired attorney's memory, I'm at number 12. Back inside, Marjorie moved without turning on lights. She retrieved her old suitcase from the hallway closet. It still smelled faintly of lavender dryer sheets. On the bed, she opened it and began packing 2 sweaters, a pale blue one and an oatmeal one with frayed cuffs. She tucked in her recipe book, filled with grease stains and notes like, Calvin's favorite, and Petra hates onions. She added her father's pocket watch and the key to her fireproof box. She wasn't sure where she would go, just that it wouldn't be here. She walked back to the kitchen one last time. The milk had curdled slightly. The deed lay waiting. She folded it gently and slipped it into the suitcase's side pocket. Without leaving a note, she zipped the bag, walked to the front door, and locked it behind her. Snow covered the yard in a clean, untouched sheet. She taped the house keys inside the mailbox. "No drama," she whispered. "Just done." She remembered Calvin once joking, "If you ever left, who'd make the roast chicken?" The memory felt like an old bruise. She ordered an Uber. While waiting, she stepped next door and knocked on Mr. Rowan's door. He opened it, eyebrows raised. "I'm leaving for a few days," she said softly. "Could you print something for me later? Property forms." He studied her face. "Of course," he said gently. "Take care of yourself, Marjorie." The Uber pulled up. The driver lowered his window and offered a warm smile. "Heading somewhere peaceful, ma'am?" "I hope so," she replied, sliding into the back seat. The roads were slick, but the driver moved carefully. They passed houses strung with Christmas lights. Marjorie realized she hadn't looked at them once this year. When they arrived at Mrs. Blythe's guest house, a brick building tucked between a diner and a laundromat, it looked exactly as she remembered. Wind chimes tinkled softly in the cold air. The driver tipped his cap. "Take care now." Marjorie nodded gratefully and stepped inside. Mrs. Blythe opened the door before Marjorie knocked, her eyes widening. "Marjorie Finn, it's been years." Mrs. Blythe ushered her into the warm lobby scented with cinnamon and lemon cleaner. "I still have that scarf you gave me last winter," she said. "The green one with the white stitches." "I didn't think you'd remember," Marjorie murmured. "Please. I don't forget people who saved my Christmas Eve with a lemon bundt cake." She led Marjorie upstairs to room 3A. Floral curtains, a small kitchenette, and a neatly made bed. "Stay as long as you need," Mrs. Blythe said softly. For the first time in years, the silence Marjorie felt wasn't loneliness. It was hers. After Mrs. Blythe left, Marjorie sat on the bed and took in the room. It was small, quiet, and uncluttered. No toys scattered across the floor, no laundry piled in corners, no voices calling her name. She hung her coat in the empty closet, watching it sway gently. On the nightstand sat a single dry daisy in a tiny vase. A small gesture, yet it warmed her. Later Mrs. Blythe knocked again, bringing 2 slices of toast and a cup of simple drip coffee. "Breakfast," she said. "You always said toast matters more than the butter." Marjorie smiled faintly. She didn't remember saying that, but maybe she had. Mrs. Blythe paused before leaving. "You're one of the kindest women on this street. You've helped people quietly for years. Let someone help you now." The words settled in Marjorie's chest, both strange and comforting. When she was alone again, she sat by the window, watching snow drift beneath the street lamps. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded deed. She smoothed its creases, whispering, "I still have something that belongs to me." The next morning, Marjorie decided to make the change official. She asked Mrs. Blythe if she knew a notary. "Janet Rivers," she replied. "Office just down the street." So Marjorie bundled herself in her coat, clutching the folder of documents. Rain tapped against the pavement as she walked. The notary's office was small, warm, and smelled faintly of peppermint. Janet, a silver-haired woman with square glasses, greeted her with a gentle smile. Mrs. Blythe sat beside Marjorie, offering quiet support. Janet reviewed the papers carefully. The transfer form, the declaration, the notarized amendment, each piece transferring Marjorie's home to a non-profit for displaced women over 60 after her passing. "Are you sure?" Janet asked softly. Marjorie nodded. "I don't want it to go to people who forget I'm standing in the same room." Janet placed a hand over hers briefly. "Then let's sign." The pen felt heavier than usual, weighted with years of silence. When she finished, Janet stamped the paper with a firm click. "That's everything." Outside, mist rolled over the street. Across from the notary's office stood Millie's Diner, a place Marjorie hadn't visited in years. Calvin used to take her there on Mother's Day back when Milo was still a toddler and Petra still pretended to care. She stepped inside. The jukebox crackled to life, playing Unchained Melody. She hadn't heard it in years. She remembered dancing barefoot in the kitchen long before life became schedules, chores, and expectations. A young waitress guided her to a window booth. "What can I get you?" she asked. "Chicken pot pie and coffee," Marjorie said. She ate slowly. No one interrupted. No one called her name. No one asked for extra napkins or complained about onions. When the bill came, she placed $3 on the table, the same tip she had always left, back when Calvin used to tease. "Mom, you're not Oprah," she whispered. "Kindness isn't about wealth." Outside, Mrs. Blythe waited beneath the diner's awning. "Do you regret it?" she asked gently. Marjorie looked at the rain streaking the glass. "Only that I didn't do it sooner." Back at the guest house, Marjorie sat on the bed and placed the final copy of the deed in the nightstand drawer. It no longer symbolized where she lived. It symbolized what she chose. Her phone buzzed moments later. A message from Calvin. "Mom, what is this? Are you serious?" She stared at the screen, then turned the phone face down. The silence said more than any explanation. She laid back on the bed, listening to the heater hum softly. For the first time in years, she felt her heart settle. New Year's Eve arrived quietly. Mrs. Blythe set out warm rolls and spiced cider. A few neighbors came, gentle women from the quilting group, a couple from the bookstore down the street, and even Mr. Rowan carrying a tin of peanut brittle. "Just stopping by," he said, tipping his hat. "But a toast with friends never hurts." They arranged extra chairs, pushing the dining table aside. The room filled with soft laughter and the warmth of people who showed up without expecting anything in return. Marjorie brought an apple pie, freshly baked. When Mrs. Blythe saw it, she smiled. "You're sitting at the head tonight." "Oh, I couldn't," Marjorie began. "You can," Mrs. Blythe said, placing a hand on her shoulder. So she sat. For once, her place wasn't in the kitchen but at the table. After dinner, they moved into the living room, each holding a small glass of apple wine. On the TV, the local station showed fireworks in Portland. The lights danced across the window, reflecting in their glasses. Mabel, one of the quilting ladies, looked at Marjorie suddenly. "Do you regret leaving your house?" Marjorie didn't hesitate. "Only that I lived so small for so long." Mrs. Blythe reached over and squeezed her hand. The countdown began on the TV. 9. They joined in quietly, their voices soft and warm, matching the rhythm of their years. When the screen flashed, "Happy New Year," they clinked glasses. "To women who left quietly," Marjorie said, raising hers, "and never came back the same." The room hummed with gentle agreement. After the celebration dwindled, Marjorie walked into the guest room. Mrs. Blythe had placed a new calendar on the wall. January's page showed a field of soft sunlight. Written beneath it was the phrase, "You are your own home." Marjorie traced the words with her fingertip. She sat at the vanity and lifted her phone. Her reflection stared back, silver streaks in her hair, lines etched deep from years of care, and eyes she finally recognized as hers. She lifted the phone and took a photo. Her first real selfie. She typed the caption slowly. "Starting over at 67. This time for me." Then she put the phone down. The night outside was still. Snow blanketed the streets. Inside, her heart felt strangely quiet, not empty but settled. She thought back on the years she had spent cooking, cleaning, giving endlessly. She had mistaken duty for love, silence for peace. She finally understood that dignity wasn't selfish, it was necessary. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and exhaled softly into the warm room. In the morning, sunlight filtered gently through the floral curtains. Marjorie stretched, feeling lighter than she had in decades. She brewed herself a small cup of coffee, savoring the quiet. There was no rush, no request, no footsteps running toward her. She stepped outside onto the small balcony, breathing in the fresh winter air. Across the street, Mr. Rowan waved lightly from his porch, holding his watering can as usual. She waved back, smiling. "Morning," he called. "How'd you sleep?" "Better than I have in years," she answered. Later that day, she walked to the river path behind the guest house. The water moved slowly, carrying bits of winter debris down its current. Families walked dogs. Children chased each other through patches of half-melted snow. Marjorie sat on a bench beneath a bare maple tree. A little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed toward Marjorie. "She looks nice," the child said loudly. Marjorie laughed quietly to herself. She had forgotten what it felt like to be seen without being needed. She returned to the guest house and found a small envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a handwritten note from Mrs. Blythe. "When you're ready, I'd love your help teaching a baking class for the ladies' group. Only if you want to." For the first time in years, someone wanted her presence, not her labor. She pressed the note to her chest. "Maybe," she whispered. "Maybe I'm ready for that." The thought warmed her more than any kitchen ever had. The following week she joined the class. The room smelled of butter, sugar, and laughter. Women in warm sweaters crowded around the table. "Marjorie, show us how to get the crust that golden," Iris asked. Marjorie smiled, rolling dough with practiced ease. "Gentle hands," she said, "and don't rush the bake." The room buzzed with joy. Petra had never once cared how she made her pies. But here people listened. Here her voice mattered. When class ended, several women hugged her. "Come back next week," they said. Afterward, she treated herself to a cup of chai at the corner cafe. A young barista complimented her scarf. "Lovely color on you," he said. She thanked him, surprised at how warm such a small kindness felt. She realized how long she had lived without simple affection, without choice, without respect. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily. She thought about Calvin and Petra. She wondered if they noticed she was gone. If Milo asked where she was. The thought no longer hurt. Simply existed. That evening, she sat in her guest room, writing in a small notebook she'd bought at the drugstore. She wrote about the burn, the cocoa, the years of giving, the chair that was never hers at the table. And then she wrote about the moment she took her life back. The moment she walked out the door with the deed tucked into her coat. She closed the notebook and whispered, "I kept waiting for them to change. But I needed to change first." The next morning her phone buzzed. Another message from Calvin, "Mom, please call me. Milo misses you." She stared at it a long time. She loved Milo deeply. But love didn't mean returning to a place where she was invisible. She typed slowly, "I'm safe. I need time." She didn't explain further. She didn't apologize. She set the phone aside and breathed out, a long, steady breath that felt like stepping across a threshold. Weeks later, Marjorie stood outside the guest house, watching early spring sunlight melt the last patches of snow. She held a warm muffin wrapped in a napkin, baked by the quilting ladies as thanks for teaching them. She felt rooted, steady, and strangely young. For years, she believed love meant giving until she disappeared. Now she understood. Kindness is a gift, but dignity is a boundary. She pulled her coat tighter and whispered to herself, "I am my own home now." And for the first time in decades, the words felt true.